The clock blinked 2:13 a.m. Beneath the heavy silence, the voice began, soft, fractured, like glass scraping water. Charles. It slipped through the floorboards, curling up from the black lake beneath Blackwater Cove, like smoke underwater, a whisper soaked in cold and sorrow. Ethan, or no Charles, froze in bed, heart hammering in a rhythm that didn't belong to his own body anymore. He sat up sharply, breath catching as the faint sound faded into the thick night air outside his window. The stillness after a storm held captive in every shadow. Something was beneath him, beneath everyone, and it had called his name. The room felt smaller now, closer. His eyes darted toward the locked door across the hall, where a slow drip echoed. Water? No one should be able to get inside at this hour, but wet footprints darkened the threadbare carpet. 5 small prints trailing just beyond the threshold. No, he whispered, voice brittle and raw against the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and years of neglect. No, no. Outside, Blackwater Lake stretched black and endless, a mirror dulled by age and secret deaths long forgotten by everyone but him now. The night smelled of decay and salt, old fish rotting under the dock's broken boards, mixed with something else, something sour and alive that made his stomach not tight enough to snap. He swallowed hard and stood up slowly. His father's house groaned around him, its timbers creaking like old bones settling deeper into rot, and the radio in the corner crackled static before sputtering into faint music from some forgotten era. Then silence again, as if nothing had happened at all. Charles pinched his temple. Was he losing it? The loss of his job wasn't enough? Losing Marianne? The town itself seemed to suffocate him with its whispered threats. No children outside after dusk, no boats on the water past twilight, windows shuttered tight against what no one dared name aloud anymore. His father never spoke of those nights, not since the bus vanished 20 years ago during that storm. 20 years without a single trace of those children swallowed whole beneath this cursed water. But tonight was different, because tonight, at exactly 2:13, there was a voice calling him up from the depths. Charles. A sudden knock shattered the silence, the kind of knock not made by human hands, deep and slow, coming from beneath the floorboards near his feet. He dropped to them desperately, trying to steady shaking fingers on damp wood that felt too cold for an ordinary house. A voice whispered again, closer this time. Come find us. His phone buzzed on the bedside table. One new message from Angelina Vale. Don't trust your own eyes. Charles swallowed dryly, staring down into shadows pooling beneath the closed door as wet drips traced random patterns down its face. Something wasn't just watching, it was waiting. And whatever was beneath Blackwater Lake wasn't done speaking yet. He wasn't safe here, not anymore. Not when it knew his name. The knocking grew louder, urgent now, as if whatever lived below was desperate to break through. And suddenly, footsteps echoed behind him in an empty hallway. But when he whirled around, no one was there. Only silence answered back, with something hungry lurking just out of sight. This town wanted more than just secrets buried under mud and water. It wanted blood. It wanted souls. And Charles Smith, once rational, once certain, was already drowning in lies he could barely remember living through. Because tonight, Blackwater Cove would finally show him what waits beneath. And it wasn't going to let him leave alive. The water lapped against the broken dock like slow, cold fingers dragging across old bones. Ethan's boots echoed hollow on rotting planks as he stepped closer to the lake's edge, breath curling in front of him. The fog clung thick, a wet blanket smothering sound and sight. Somewhere deep beneath Blackwater Lake, something waited. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not after dark, not past 2:13 a.m. But sleep was a stranger now, replaced by that voice. Whispering from underwater, his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Don't listen. Ethan's thumb hovered, hesitating before deleting it. He told himself it was a prank. A town joke played on outsiders, yet the hairs on his neck stood rigid, every nerve screaming the opposite. A splash broke the silence, a soft, deliberate thud beneath the surface, and then footsteps echoed behind him on the dock. Ethan? The voice was fragile, breathless. Angelina. She stepped out of shadows cast by gnarled trees lining the shoreline, face pale as moonlight, but eyes fierce and unreadable. You shouldn't be out here, she said, voice low. They're watching. Who? His voice cracked under the weight of panic swelling inside him. She shook her head slowly. You don't know what you're dealing with. Her gaze flickered toward the water. For a moment, Ethan thought he saw movement just beneath the glassy surface, a pair of wide eyes staring back at them. No ripples stirred the water around those eyes. They were waiting, patient, hungry. You hear it too, Angelina whispered, stepping closer until he could smell rain-soaked earth on her skin and something metallic, like rust or blood. He nodded, swallowing hard. Every night at 2:13. Her fingers twitched nervously at her coat collar. That's when they come calling. The wind shifted suddenly. Branches scraped against broken windows of a nearby abandoned house, the old Marrow estate, its blackened silhouette looming like a corpse frozen in time. Something about that place always made Ethan's stomach twist into knots. We need to go there, Angelina said abruptly. Tonight. Before he could protest, she grabbed his arm, cold and urgent, pulling him toward a narrow path swallowed by thick brush and shadowed pines dripping with moss. His heart thundered louder than the pulsing darkness all around them. Inside the house smelled like mildew and forgotten sins, a stale taste of decay layered with faint traces of smoke and iron. The floorboards moaned beneath their feet as if warning them away. Angelina led him down into the basement, where darkness didn't just fall, it pressed down like water, thick enough to choke on. In the corner lay an old radio, cracked and dust-caked but suddenly sputtering static that hissed like whispered secrets lost long ago. Then came a knock, deep and measured, from behind the crumbling stone wall. Ethan froze as shadows pooled and writhed at his feet. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, exhaling cold dread that crawled up his spine and squeezed his heart tight until all reason slipped away into darkness. Knock! Another knock, this time from inside his own chest, and somewhere beyond reality, beneath Blackwater Lake. A soft voice called his name again. Ethan, Ethan. And then, silence broke with a scream echoing through tangled roots and broken glass. Angelina was gone. No sign left but wet footprints trailing deeper into shadow below Blackwater Lake's cursed surface, and Charles Smith standing alone with blood in his mouth and terror blooming inside his skull. Something had crossed over from beneath, and it wasn't finished yet. The wet footprints stopped just inside the door. Charles stared at them, barely visible against the old oak floorboards, but they glistened in the faint moonlight leaking through the cracked window. They were small, bare feet, toes splayed like a child's, but the door had been locked tight for hours. He reached out, trembling, and touched the cold floor. Damp, fresh. A slow scrape sounded behind him, soft, deliberate, like nails dragged across wood. "Who's there?" His voice cracked, swallowed by silence. No answer. Only the sound of his own ragged breathing. Charles backed away toward the staircase, heart hammering. Then an abrupt knock from below, one sharp rap. Two more followed, steady, rhythmic, knock, 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 beneath the house. His father's warning echoed in his mind, never go down after 2:13. But curiosity shoved past fear. He grabbed a flashlight from the hallway table and crept down to the basement door. Cold air oozed out like breath from a grave as he cracked it open. Darkness spilled upward, a suffocating black that seemed to pulse with something alive beneath its surface. Then a voice came, soft, drawn out, almost melodic but hollow. "Charles." He spun around, empty hallway. "Who is that?" The whisper slipped through the walls again, curling around his ears. Beneath, beneath, beneath. His skin prickled. Was it inside his head? No, it wasn't possible. Yet each night at exactly 2:13 a.m., the same time those children vanished 2 decades ago, the lake seemed to breathe out their voices into Blackwater Cove, always calling him specifically. Charles clenched his jaw and forced himself down the creaking stairs into the basement, where shadows clung to every corner like spiderwebs. Then he saw it. An old radio on a dusty shelf clicked on by itself, crackling static until words emerged, whispers layered over one another, too fast to decipher but unmistakably human voices screaming beneath water. "Help us! Find us! Please!" Cold sweat dripped down his temple as he stepped closer, and suddenly felt a weight pressing on his chest, squeezing tighter with every breath. Something was watching him, waiting beneath that oppressive darkness. He needed answers before it came for him next. Upstairs footsteps halted abruptly, too soft for his father's usual shuffle. A woman's silhouette appeared at the top of stairs, Angelina Vale's pale face framed by midnight hair dripping with rain from outside. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered sharply, eyes darting nervously toward the basement door, as if expecting something to crawl out any second now. "Why won't you tell me what happened here?" Charles demanded, voice raw but desperate for truth. Her lips pressed together tight. Some things are better left drowned. Suddenly, the basement lights flickered violently before plunging everything into pitch blackness. And then, a wet hand clamped over Charles' mouth from behind, dragging him backward into suffocating silence, where only one thought screamed in his mind. They're coming up from beneath Blackwater Lake. And this time, they want us. The walls breathed, not with air, but something deeper, a slow, wet sigh that pressed against Charles's ribs like drowning. He stood in the shadowed hallway of his father's house, the old floorboards creaking beneath him. The clock on the mantel had stopped ticking exactly at 2:12 a.m. 1 minute to go. The silence wasn't empty. It carried a weight, a pulse. Then came the knock. Knock! Soft, muffled, like something tapping from underwater. Charles froze. His breath fogged the stale air, each exhale a ragged whisper between the rotten wood and peeling wallpaper. He reached out, fingertips grazing the cold plaster, trying to tell if it was real or some cruel trick of his fraying mind. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, slapping harder now, an urgent summons from beneath Blackwater Lake itself. "Dad?" he whispered, voice cracking like brittle glass. No answer. The hall behind him suddenly smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves, as if the forest had invaded the house in the night. Then his eyes caught movement, a faint glimmer by the basement door at the end of the corridor. Wet footprints traced a crooked line down from the handle to the floorboards. But he was sure it had been locked hours ago. His pulse ratcheted higher. "Dad," he said again, stepping forward slowly. The door creaked open on its own, inch by terrible inch, revealing a pitch-black basement that seemed to swallow light whole. A soft voice drifted upward through the darkness. Charlie. It wasn't his father's voice, nor any familiar sound from his memories. This was different, distant but intimate, like someone calling him through thick water and years of silence. "Who's there?" Charles demanded, swallowing a wave of nausea that rose like bile from somewhere deep inside his chest. But only silence answered back. He flicked on his phone's flashlight and aimed it into the abyss below. The beam quivered over rusty tools and shattered glass before landing on something impossible. Dozens of small wooden masks strewn across cracked concrete steps, faces carved crudely but with disturbingly lifelike features, each one stained dark with something that looked like dried blood. Charles's hands trembled violently as he crouched closer, heart hammering against ribs like a trapped animal desperate for escape. Why were these masks here? Who made them? And why did one look exactly like Angelina Vale? The question stabbed at him sharper than any blade could have. Suddenly, a cold splash echoed from deep within the basement. Heavy footsteps fell into rhythm just below where no one should have been walking. His skin prickled. Goosebumps raced down his neck as an invisible weight pressed harder on his senses. Watching, waiting, breathing close enough to feel wetness on his skin, though nothing was visible in the choking dark. His phone flickered and died, plunging Charles into pitch black and crushing silence, except for one thing. That voice again, barely more than a breath now. "You don't belong here." And then, a guttural scream erupted somewhere behind him, the sound tearing through stone and memory alike, followed by shattering glass upstairs, and footsteps running fast toward the basement door. Only they weren't human feet anymore. "Dad!" Charles screamed as he lunged for the door handle. But it slammed shut before he could reach it, trapping him in total darkness, with only that haunting whisper swirling around him, and the masks staring back from every shadowed corner. The voice beneath Blackwater Lake was no longer just calling. It was coming for him. The knock came again. 3 sharp raps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the thick wooden walls of his father's house, except the sound was wet, like a fist pounding from beneath the floorboards. Ethan froze. The air felt heavier, darker. He could smell something foul, like rotten fish buried in damp earth. His breath hitched as the knocking turned into a rhythm, thud thump, as if the lake itself was beating against the house. He wanted to scream. to run outside into the cold night and never look back, but his feet stayed rooted in place. "Dad?" His voice barely cracked above a whisper. No answer. The old clock on the mantel ticked past 2:12 a.m. A chill crawled up Ethan's spine. He swallowed hard and crept toward the basement door, the source of that god-awful noise. The rusted knob shivered under his fingers, slick with condensation. Then silence. No knocking. No dripping water. Just the low hum of something breathing beneath him. Ethan backed away, heart slamming against his ribs. His mind raced with fragmented memories. His father's warning not to go down there after dark. The missing children. The bridge that vanished into fog 20 years ago. The same moment when the voice whispered his name from Blackwater Lake. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses, never had, but whatever this was, it wasn't natural, not human. A sudden tapping on the window shattered his paralysis. Ethan spun around, eyes wide. A shadow slipped away into the blackness beyond the glass, the shape too slender to be his father or any man he knew. He pressed his palm against cold glass and peered out, catching only a flash of pale skin and dark hair disappearing behind an ancient maple tree gnarled with moss. "Angelina?" His voice cracked with doubt. Blackwater Cove held its breath. He remembered how Angelina Vale had appeared at Town Hall last week, silent, inscrutable, and how her eyes seemed to flicker with secrets too deep for daylight. Rumors said she lived alone in that abandoned mansion by the shore, where no one dared trespass after sunset. Why would she be here now? And why did he feel like she was watching him, even when she wasn't? Ethan's phone buzzed sharply, a message lighting up the screen. "Don't open any doors tonight. No sender ID." His hands trembled as he stared at those words. Was it a prank? Or another warning? He glanced down at his father's worn journal lying open on the table, a hastily scribbled entry smeared with ink and saltwater stains. "They come for us all. When you hear your name beneath Blackwater Lake, do not answer." His throat tightened. What was they? And why did it feel like they were already inside this house? Suddenly, from somewhere deep below, a scraping noise began, a slow drag against wood and stone, as if something clawing its way upward from drowning depths wanted out. Ethan's rational mind screamed, "Run!" but curiosity and dread kept him locked inside this nightmare fold between waking and madness. And then the basement door creaked open on its own, inch by agonizing inch, revealing darkness so thick it seemed alive, waiting, hungry, calling his name. Charles. The knocking came again, slow, deep, like a fist banging against the hollow ribs of the lake bed. Charles sat frozen on the creaking porch swing, rain drumming softly above him. An old rhythm, but it was wrong tonight. He could taste salt and rot in the air, thick as old bruises. The night had folded itself tight around Blackwater Cove like a noose, and every shadow seemed to twitch with breath. 2:13 a.m. He glanced at the cracked clock on the peeling wall inside his father's house. Just on time. The knocking wasn't from the house. It was beneath it. From Blackwater Lake itself. It echoed through his bones. "Dad?" Charles whispered, voice brittle as dry leaves. The front door creaked open behind him, slow and deliberate. Angelina stood there, pale in the dim light, her eyes glassy and unreadable, like she'd been underwater too long. Her wet hair clung to her cheekbone. A dark strand slid across her lip. "You hear it, too," she said without preamble, stepping onto the porch. Charles swallowed hard, trying not to believe what he knew was true, that something was waking down there. "It's calling." Her voice cracked just enough for him to catch it, a tremor masked by cold control. "They've started coming back." He looked away toward the lake's black mirror, broken only by a flicker, something moving just under the surface. No ripple, no splash. But there it was, faint silhouettes rising slowly like drowned ghosts reaching for breath. "Why now?" Charles asked, throat tightening. Angelina hesitated before answering. "Because you're here." Her words hit harder than any storm lash or winter freeze. Inside the house, an old radio burst static, then a child's voice whispered clear as day, "Charles, come play." He jumped up. The radio snapped off like a switch flipped in an empty room. "Did you say something?" Angelina's head tilted unnervingly close. "No." He shook his head, heart thrumming out of sync with reason. But his mind betrayed him, visions surfacing like shards of shattered glass. A bus caught in lightning, children screaming drowned out by thunder, empty seats rocking alone on that ancient bridge above the lake. His father never mentioned that night, not once, but now Charles felt the silence pressing down like water filling lungs. "I found something," Charles murmured suddenly, the words catching fire in his throat. A crumpled journal page he'd torn from his father's locked drawer earlier that evening. "Do not open doors after 2:13 a.m." "Why?" Angelina asked softly, but her eyes held questions darker than midnight waters. He hadn't answered because behind them, through the cracked window pane, a pale face stared in. Mouth agape like a frozen scream, and eyes too wide for any child alive. Then it blinked and vanished into shadow. Charles whirled around, heart pounding so loud he thought he might bleed out through his ears. But there was nothing there except the wet footprints glistening across the floorboards. Small, dragging toward the basement door slowly closing by itself. And beneath all of it, the knocking grew louder, doom pulsing like a heartbeat from below Blackwater Lake, calling for him to listen, to come closer, to join whatever nightmare waited patiently beneath its black glass skin. He barely had time to scream before the basement door creaked wide open and darkness spilled out, hungry and alive. The basement door slammed shut on its own. Charles froze, heart thudding like a hammer against ribs too tight to breathe. The darkness beneath the floorboards swallowed the dim light from his flashlight, dragging it down into a black abyss that seemed to pulse with every breath he took. Wet, slimy air rose up, thick with something rotten, something drowned and dead. A soft scraping noise came from the far corner. Then a wet cough. He swallowed hard. "Dad?" His voice cracked. No answer. The silence stretched, oppressive, suffocating, as if the basement itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to make the next move. Charles forced his legs forward, each step stirring dust and mold and something fouler underneath that clung to his skin like cold sweat. He reached the rusted metal shelves crammed with jars of cloudy water and unrecognizable shapes suspended inside them. His fingers brushed one jar, a child's hand, shriveled and pale as wax. Then the voice came again. Soft at first, a whisper curling through the dank air like smoke seeping through cracks in old stone walls. "Charles?" His blood iced over. The sound was not just nearby, it was inside him, vibrating behind his ribs, beneath Blackwater Lake. "Don't. Come." The voice trailed off like it was trying not to be heard by someone, or something else lurking below. "What do you want?" he whispered back, barely able to hold on to himself. From somewhere deeper in the shadows, a heavy knocking began. Thump, thump, thump. Slow and steady like an ancient drum beating out a warning or a summons. He turned sharply and nearly stumbled over a pile of soggy papers scattered on the floor. One paper caught his eye. Faded handwriting looping frantic words. An old town ledger marked with names, dates, deaths. And beneath them all, one line scratched out in red ink. "Do not open after 2:13 a.m." A shudder raced down Charles's spine. Why hadn't Dad said anything? Outside, the wind howled low and guttural, rattling the loose window panes above like fingers tapping Morse code from some unseen creature watching him in darkness. Suddenly, footsteps echoed above stairs, slow and deliberate, heavy boots dragging against wood. Not Dad's usual shuffle, but something heavier. Older. Wrong. Charles flipped off his flashlight and crouched in silence as shadows swallowed him whole. The door creaked open slowly upstairs, the scrape stretching impossibly long and then closed again without a sound. "Angelina?" he called out, throat raw in the stillness. No answer. Only then did he notice. A wet trail leading from the front porch to the edge of Blackwater Lake appeared suddenly inside the basement room. Muddy footprints soaked into broken wooden planks beneath his feet. Cold dread knotted inside him as realization struck. They weren't outside walking toward the lake in their sleep anymore. They were inside now, coming from beneath it. And at exactly 2:13 a.m., the water would rise again. Because whatever had been waiting under Blackwater Cove for decades wasn't just calling anymore. It was hungry. And it wanted everyone. The cold seeped through the cracked floorboards like slow poison, curling around Charles's ankles as he crouched in the basement's thick darkness. The air was heavy, damp, earthy, smelling of rot and something else he couldn't place, something metallic and wet. His flashlight beam jittered across rusted tools hanging crooked on the wall. Somewhere close by, water dripped. One drop, then another. Echoing. At exactly 2:13 a.m., A soft vibration hummed beneath his feet, a rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat locked deep under Blackwater Lake. His breath caught. Then it came. That voice again. Not over the water, but beneath it, slithering up from the black mud below like an ancient secret breaking free. Charles, whispered just for him. He wanted to flee, but his legs refused. His mind spiraled. Was this real? Or had losing his job and marriage loosened his grip on sanity? Yet the voice was too precise, too clear. It carried dread and warning all at once. A shuffle behind him made him spin around. Angelina stood at the basement stairs, pale as moonlight, eyes glassy but sharp. Her lips barely moved. "They're waking up," she said softly, voice cracked like old leather. "What?" Charles swallowed hard. "Who?" "The children." She stepped down into the dark with him, the ones who vanished 20 years ago. Her words were a knife twisting in his gut. "They're not dead," she whispered. "Not really." Charles's heart hammered against ribs tighter than chains. "Why are you here?" he asked, voice shaking. "To stop it," she said simply, and then froze, listening to something he couldn't hear. The basement walls groaned. Shadows stretched thin fingers toward them. Somewhere below, the lake, it was stirring again. Suddenly, wet footprints appeared across the dusty floor in front of them. Not human. Too small. Too perfect. As if soaked porcelain dolls had been dragged inside and left their marks like clues or curses. Charles reached out to touch one. Coldness bit through his gloves like frostbite. A quiet thump echoed from behind a boarded-up door in the corner, deep knocking underwater, but louder now. "It's moving closer," Angelina said breathlessly. "It's almost here." His rational mind screamed no. This was impossible, but every fiber of his body told him it wasn't lying. A burst of static crackled from an old radio sitting on a shelf where nothing electrical should work anymore. The dial spun wildly before stopping on a faint broadcast, the chilling lullaby teachers used to sing at school campfires decades ago. And then, the lights flickered violently before plunging them into total blackness. Charles fumbled for his phone. No signal. Cold fingers grazed his neck. Not quite human touch, more like water sliding over skin, and he gasped, spinning blindly. But Angelina was gone. Only silence answered back. The voice rose again beneath the earth. "Come home." This time louder, desperate, and filled with rage. Charles sank to his knees, heart-pounding madness as realization crashed down. They weren't just voices beneath the lake anymore. They were breaking through the surface, and they were coming for everyone in Blackwater Cove, starting with him. The knocking started again. Deep, hollow thuds, like a fist pounding from beneath the floorboards of his father's cramped living room. Charles froze, breath shallow, every hair on his arms prickling as the sound pulsed through the wood like a heartbeat out of sync with his own. He glanced at the grandfather clock, 2:13 a.m. The same goddamn time. A whisper curled through the silence, soft and wet, like lips brushing against the underside of water. "Charles?" He wanted to scream, slam the windows shut, barricade himself inside, but something heavier than fear held him in place. The voice was pleading this time, but twisted, almost desperate. "Come find us." His father's old radio crackled suddenly from across the room, static spitting and swirling into faint children's laughter. Then silence. Charles's throat tightened. No kids lived in Blackwater Cove anymore. He stood slowly, every step echoing hollowly over creaking floorboards soaked with decades of rot and regret. Outside, thunder rumbled far away, but inside the house felt sealed in a vacuum of cold dread. "Dad?" he called softly into the gloom. No answer, only that endless knock, knock, knock beneath his feet. Charles's mind churned with fragments, memories he wasn't sure were real anymore. That stormy night 20 years ago when the school bus vanished into Blackwater Lake's murky depths. The rumors whispered around town like poison, that it wasn't just an accident. The town had made a deal back then, a terrible pact, and now it was calling again. Do not open the door after 2:13. But he knew that rule wasn't about doors. It was about what waited beyond them. His phone buzzed sharply on the kitchen counter. A message from Angelina. "Meet me by the old mill before dawn. There's something you need to see." Something he dreaded but couldn't refuse. Outside, rain tapped against cracked window panes as shadows lengthened, crawling like spilled ink across peeling wallpaper. Charles wrapped his coat tighter and headed for the front door, only to stop cold when wet footprints appeared on the dusty floor behind him. They trailed silently from a locked bedroom down to where he stood, too large for a child, but too light for an adult. Not possible. He swallowed hard and stepped outside into the night, thick with fog and salt air. The lake lay black and still ahead, a glassy abyss swallowing everything whole. As he walked toward the mill, a shape shimmered beneath the water's surface. Pale faces pressed just below the waves, mouths opening wide in silent screams. Or maybe warnings? Charles blinked, and they were gone. He didn't look back, but somewhere behind him, a voice whispered one last time before fading into dark. "They're coming!" The water was rising inside the house, not flooding exactly. More like the walls themselves were bleeding Blackwater Lake's chill into every crack, every splintered floorboard groaning beneath a weight no one could see. Ethan stood in the center of his father's old living room, boots sinking just a fraction too deep into the rotted wood. The smell was unbearable. Wet earth, decayed fish, and something else, something metallic and ancient that crawled beneath his skin. "Charles." The voice came again, soft, wrong, like it slipped through water and shadow both at once. He whipped around. Angelina stood in the doorway, her eyes wide as flint, but her face unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, voice trembling with a terror she didn't want him to hear. "I have to know." He clenched his fists so tightly his nails bit into his palms. "What happened 20 years ago? What's under this lake?" She stepped forward, but stopped short when the air shifted, a slow, low knocking coming from somewhere below the floorboards. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They're not gone. Not really." A sudden creak echoed through the silence like a breaking bone. Ethan felt breath freeze in his chest. He crouched down, pressing his ear to the floor. The knocking grew louder now, rhythmic, desperate, almost pleading. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Angelina nodded slowly, biting her lip until it bled slightly. "It's them, calling." His heart pounded harder than ever before as realization slithered through his mind. Those missing children, the bus that vanished in the storm, were trapped beneath Blackwater Lake's black skin. And now, something else wore their faces. The shadows thickened around them like ink spilled on paper, swallowing light and hope both whole. Without warning, a cold hand grasped Ethan's ankle from beneath the floor, a touch like ice wrapping bone, sending him crashing backward with a strangled cry. He scrambled up, choking on panic and disbelief. "Don't let it take you," Angelina urged, grabbing his arm with frantic strength. Her eyes darted toward the old basement door ajar down the hall, the threshold to something darker than any nightmare he'd ever imagined. "We have to finish this," Ethan said, voice cracking between fear and resolve. Step by trembling step, they descended into darkness, where memories twisted like dead roots tangled in mud, where unseen things breathed cold breath against their necks, where every whispered secret clawed to escape drowning forever. And then, a dozen tiny faces floated up through the murky water pooling at their feet, eyes empty but watching, mouths moving soundlessly beneath waves of grief and hunger. "It wants more." Ethan realized aloud, voice hollowing under weight he couldn't fight off anymore. Angelina shook her head fiercely. "No one leaves here alive if we don't break its hold tonight." But as they reached for salvation in that suffocating abyss, the lights flickered once, then went out completely, drowning them in silence, and something else, waiting just beyond where sight could reach, whispering their names beneath Blackwater Lake's black heart, promising an end, or worse, a beginning no one would survive to see. Ethan's last thought before everything drowned was simple. It had been waiting for him.